My name had disappeared from the facade of my skyscraper 2 minutes before I arrived, and it felt less like maintenance work than like a sentence carried out without appeal. I stepped out of the armored sedan, heard the whistling of the high altitude and the clicking of cameras, and for the first time in years felt that the ground beneath my feet did not belong to me. My pass licked the red light of the turnstile and returned a cold piece of plastic, like a foreign hand refusing a handshake. The concierge, who remembered my coffee and my habits, lowered his eyes and read in a glassy voice the prompt on the screen. Access revoked. For property matters, contact the temporary administrator. Administrator. In my home. In my name, erased letter by letter. The elevator lifted me up without a word, but on the wall inside there was a small monitor broadcasting the stock exchange channel, and there, in the lower ribbon, a message flashed. HRYTSCO is changing the control structure. Consolidation of the package in the hands of Rustlin Capital. Rustlin is me, and Rustlin Capital is not my company. I caught the reflection of my own face in the stainless steel and did not recognize the person studying me, as if I were a risk in a report. The phone vibrated without pauses, but all the messages spoke one language. Signature confirmed. Power of attorney valid. Transaction completed. A power of attorney that I had forgotten about, like one forgets a small debt to a friend that over the years grows into a leech on an artery. Who is in my office now? I asked the security guard on the top floor, where the glass meets the sky. Interim administrator and representative of Rustlin Capital, he answered with unmistakable politeness. They asked not to be disturbed. The office door was ajar, and I heard the hollow silence that only comes where things that change the landscape have spoken seconds before. On my desk lay a blue folder, my blue folder, but with a new logo that looked like a sarcastic parody of mine. My brother stood by the panoramic window. He held a pen in his hands, the same movements he made when we shared the last piece of bread as children. Only now, instead of bread, my heart was on a stand. You were exactly one night late, he said. I didn't steal. I used your permission. The power of attorney was for accidents. I whispered, and my voice seemed foreign to me. Not for moving the throne. You yourself turned every day into an accident, he replied. I just had to call it by its name. The words sloshed through me like ice water, and I realized that the war had begun before I arrived, that the document had already cut me off from my walls, my people, my name. Behind the glass, the flickering of the city seemed like the indifferent pulse of a great animal that didn't care who sat on the throne. I stood in my own office like a random guest who had come in to warm himself for a second and realized. Now there was a different warmth here, different hands, different rules. And when my brother put down his pen and said, "Tomorrow we'll sign the rest," I felt something click between my ribs, not breaking, but as if recalling the original form that I had once betrayed for the sake of brilliance. I left the building unescorted, though I was usually followed by a crowd of shadows, advisors, lawyers, assistants. That night, I heard the silence of the street ring louder than all the honking of New York City. My name was already becoming a hashtag HRYTSCO fall, and no one seemed to ask if I was to blame. People always crave a fall. They love to watch something tall lose its balance. I walked away, feeling the chills sinking into my bones, not knowing which hurt more, the loss of money or the betrayal of the one whose fate I had been building with my own hands. The next morning I woke up not to a call, but to silence. No letters, no messages, no reminders. My phone had become an archive of dead contacts. My mail was blocked at the office. The security at my house changed without explanation, and even the driver who had been driving me for 10 years suddenly found another offer. My world shrank to the size of the kitchen table in an apartment I hadn't been to in years. I sat with a cup of cold coffee and looked out the window, where my face was reflected, the tired eyes of a man who had played the role of God for years and suddenly realized that even his signature had no weight. Then the blows began from other sides. First, the tax office. Then, the media, which showed my old photos from lavish parties next to headlines about corruption schemes. I recognized the people I had fed, pulled out of the mud, and now they were giving interviews about my cruelty. One channel even showed my brother. He was sitting in the same building that had once been mine, and he said calmly, without emotion, "I didn't destroy the company. I just cleaned it of its past." I screamed at the TV, but my voice had no weight. Everything I said was left in an empty room. That night, I understood what true isolation sounds like. Not loneliness, but isolation, when you are alive, but you are no longer in the system. I tried to fight. I hired lawyers, gathered the remnants of trust, began an investigation. But the deeper I dug, the more dirt I raised. My empire was built not only on my work. There were shadows, fake accounts, secret transfers, deals with people who are better not to be mentioned. And all of this, as it turned out, gathered in one moment to drown me. One day I received a letter without a signature, only one sentence. It all started when you chose success over truth. I looked at this sheet for a long time and realized I was not a victim, I was a consequence. But the realization did not ease the pain. My brother was silent, the media rejoiced, and I was left alone, among the wreckage that I once called my greatness. And when I heard that an official investigation was being prepared against me, I realized this is not the bottom yet. The bottom is ahead. Everything changed that night when I received a message from an unknown number. 3 words, "Your brother is not alone." At first I thought it was another attempt at blackmail. But the message had a photo attached to it, a scan of a document I had never seen. At the top was the logo of my former company. At the bottom was the signature of my brother and the man I once called my mentor, Alexander Voronov. The same man who taught me about my first business, who was sitting next to me when we were counting our first millions, and who disappeared as soon as the big game began. I met him 2 days later. Not in the office, not in a restaurant, but in a cheap coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, where the smell of wet asphalt mixed with the aroma of instant coffee. He was sitting in a corner, changed, gaunt, with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were the same, cold, attentive, as if scanning a person to the bone. "You came," he said, without looking up. "I wasn't sure you had any desire to hear the truth." "I have no choice anymore," I answered. He placed the flash drive in front of me. "It contains the history of your company. Not the one you remember, but the one they made after you. Your brother is just a facade. Behind him are those you once opened the door to, thinking they were just partners. They've been preparing for this for years. You were a convenient god while you were making a profit." I took the flash drive, but didn't insert it right away. 2 forces were fighting inside me, fear and thirst. Fear, that whatever I learn will break me completely. Thirst, that maybe I still have a chance to get the truth back. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He smiled briefly, like a man who no longer hopes for forgiveness. "Because I too once sold the truth. And it's harder for me to live with it than it is for you now." When I got home and turned on my computer, the screen was filled with files. Acts, reports, contracts, audio recordings. All of it was arranged in a creepy mosaic. My empire was not just a business. It was a money laundering tool for an international consortium that had been using my name for years. I was just a window, and everything I called my success was part of a game played by much bigger people. I looked at all this, and the thought raced through my head. Everything I was proud of was a lie. My brother had only followed orders. And the orders came from above, from those to whom I had once opened the door. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Slowly, 3 times. I looked around and saw a woman I hadn't seen for many years. She was standing in the hallway, holding an old photograph in her hands. We had once been together. She was a journalist, the only one who had ever told me the truth straight to my face. "I know what you found," she said quietly. "But you don't understand the main thing. It's not just about you. It's about everything they control. If you go against them, they won't just erase your name. They'll rewrite history." I looked at her, and something like faith awoke inside me. Not in my own righteousness, but in the fact that the world really can be changed if, for once, we break our silence. And then I decided, I won't get my name back. I'll burn everything behind it. I woke up feeling as if I had been thrown off a cliff into a shattering shop window. Everything was louder, sharper. Even the air smelled different, because every breath could now be either a doom or a salvation. I gathered myself not as a man preparing to fight for his estates, but as a man who could no longer pretend that his choices were without price. And so my plan was not a clever legal maneuver or an attempt to bribe those who had already turned their backs. My plan was simple in its brutal honesty, to show the whole truth where it could not be erased, and to give control to those who had not yet learned that owning a thing did not mean being responsible for it. I translated documents, signed public requests, contacted the few journalists I had once trusted, and each step was more an act of repentance than a tactical victory, because I understood that even if I won the courts and got back part of my name, nothing I had managed to destroy in myself for the sake of profit would automatically come back to life. On the day we went to press, I stood before 1,000 eyes as openly as I had once opened the doors to new projects, and I spoke slowly, as if I were putting each word together from fragments. I spoke of mistakes, of agreements, of people who had suffered, and I did not avoid any answer. Even if it hit me in the shoulder like an ice hammer, I knew that the power of words cannot fix everything. But sometimes words are a step that sets in motion a series of decisions heavier than any contract. Around my ironic stage stood those who had once pretended to be a god, and those who had rejoiced in my downfall. There were the lawyers, and those who had testified, and my brother, whom I had looked into the eyes for the first time since the night I had seen him at my desk with a pen in his hand, and the silence between us had become louder than all the speeches. "You can go," he told me in front of the cameras, his voice like a sentence. "You can take your shame and hide." "I am not running away," I replied, and it was as brief as the truth. The climax did not occur in the courtroom or under the explosion of media sensation. It occurred inside me. The choice between defending an old image and fearing the loss of the last shreds of honor, or risking giving up control and letting the world admit my guilt and perhaps learn to live differently. I chose the latter, not because I knew it would bring victory, but because to keep a name built on lies would mean continuing the same criminal logic I had once hated in others. And as I signed the papers, as I opened the archives to journalists, as I allowed those I had humiliated to speak first, I felt something heavy inside me begin to unfurl, like an old mechanism finally releasing a spring that had been compressed for too long. It was not victory, it was not final repentance, but it was a step in a direction where humanity mattered more than the balance of the report. A few months passed. I was no longer called on TV, I was no longer mentioned in financial reports, and even my name was no longer spelled correctly, sometimes with a mistake, sometimes without a capital letter. I had become a shadow of my own legend, but in a strange way that was a relief. For the first time in a decade, I could walk down the street without eyes that were either pleading or envious or afraid. I could just be, without security, without phone calls, without a plan for 10 years ahead. A person, not a symbol. And when I looked at my reflection in the window of the small store, I saw neither a monster nor a genius. I saw a man who had learned to live with his own silence. One morning I drove out of town to where my brother and I used to fish on the old bridge. I hadn't planned to meet. I just wanted to see the place where it all began. But he was already there. He was sitting on the railing, smoking, and when he saw me, he didn't say anything. We stood together for a few minutes, silent. Then he said, "I thought you would hate me." "I did," I replied calmly. "But hate is more tiring over time than loss." He nodded, tossing his cigarette but into the water. "You did what I couldn't. You admitted." "I admitted not through strength, through fatigue. And that's what strength is," he said. "To be able to stop." We didn't hug. We didn't apologize. We just stood there watching the sun set over the city we'd both once tried to conquer. I realized then that victory wasn't about getting back power or money, but about no longer being a slave to our past. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote my last letter. Not to my brother, not to my former partners, to the world. There were no excuses, just one question that I left open. Can a person be rich and remain honest if the world around them sells the truth for more than gold? I didn't look for an answer, because I understood. Honesty is not a state, but a choice that must be made every day, even when no one is looking, even when everything is already lost. And when in the morning I closed my laptop and went outside, where the air smelled of rain, it seemed to me that I was finally free. Not because I had everything back, but because for the first time I was not afraid to start from scratch.